Washington's in-state class in 2027 is loaded.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, just a quick reminder to all the everydayers out there before we get going, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click the little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today, where we're going to play one of our favorite games on this channel of one award, Who Gets It, for the 2025 season. And we think it's going to be a really fun year. So we wanted to give all the everydayers out there an early primer on the 2027 class. So that means a couple of things. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite thing, defensive line recruiting. We're going to get there in a little bit because that's where the number one in-state player in Washington resides. But we'll get to him in a little bit because there are so many in-state talents coming down the road in 2027 that Washington must secure.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at the 2027 class, you just run down the list. There's a good chance Washington can clean up. You go beyond just the top three guys where you look at it in the 2026 class. That's what ended up happening. The guy for me is Braylon Pope, where guy from Sumner High School, 6'1", 175. It really intrigues me. We were talking about this before the show.
Sorry, he's a 4 now, right? I just want to
4-star on the composite, 3-star on technically on 247. So, narrative be what you want to go. But it should be a 4-star, I think, when it's all said and done. And it's a guy that reminds me a lot, not necessarily of Denzel Boston, but just one of those under-the-radar guys in the state of Washington where he doesn't have a ton of big offers early on. And I think given Washington and Kevin Cummings went in early on him, that's an opportunity to close early on a guy like that, because the longer he goes without some of those bigger offers and more Big Ten offers, maybe some, Big 12 offers come in, those are the types of guys where you should be able to clean up early on and start building that class so that you can then lean in on some of the upper guys, as the class moves along.
So absolutely. I like where you're going with that. I wanted to talk about a couple of guys that we've seen on campus a lot over, just the course of spring practice, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do this, where it's, hey, we obviously have spent a lot of time covering all the ins and outs of the 26 class. But as we were kind of just strolling around on campus during spring practice, we saw a lot of guys where, we try to walk by, get a glimpse at the name tag and just see who some of these guys are that are coming down the road. And one person who we saw at a significant amount of practices was 4-star tight end Zach Albright. And this is something that's really interesting, where I've seen a lot of people just kind of being a little harsh on the 2026 tight end class, where you and I have talked about it, some of the bigger names that ended up going elsewhere, Kai Wesley, Landon Myrie being a couple of them. And you and I are both very high on Sam Villadal and what he could bring down the road in a couple of seasons. You had a great article over on Huskies Wire about his decision to transfer high schools. And one of the reasons he wanted to do that is to enroll early. So there's a lot going into this 26 class at tight end that I think you look at it and it's okay. You might be able to take a more developmental guy because you look down the road a little bit, and he's from Glacier Peak High School. He's somebody who I think Washington is really high on, and they might have similar plans for him that they do with guys like Baron Naone and Decker DeGraff, where the plan might be to get him on the field early. And it's something where we've seen Jordan Pow go over and have several conversations with him when he's on campus during spring practice. And it always just kind of feels like Washington has been in a really solid spot with a guy like that for a long time. And obviously, as we'll get to with defensive line, that doesn't mean you can just completely forego one class for what's coming next. But it's kind of a solution where, okay, if we take a guy who we like, but might need a couple of years to develop, then next year that gives us a little bit more room to aim a little bit higher and stack classes in a different way, where we know we have that depth on the back end, but can also go out there and get somebody who can compete for a starting spot really early on.
I think, I'm not sure if it was the spring game or what it was, if it was a game in the fall, because I remember Pow coming over to Albright and his family, and just the way that they were talking and communicating, it seemed like, oh man, this guy, I almost want to look over. You're like, hey, did he already commit? Like, am I
Right?
here? And it's just one of those things where, again, when you're in early on in-state guys, those are the ones you have to close on. There's sometimes where when guys blow up and, like Sion Cajo, where you look at him and think, he's got a few other offers where if he ends up going elsewhere besides Washington, I wouldn't be surprised just because, quarterback is the one position that might be a little hard to sell. But everybody else, especially Albright, that's a guy where if we're looking at by the end of even October, November, December, if he's not committed, I'd be kind of surprised just because it's like, why not start building this class a little early? And that would be a perfect guy to deal with because he has the skills to play, or like you mentioned, he has all the tangibles. But then obviously, when we're talking about in-state recruiting and, fans like, what's another 3-star, you still have to stack the talent. Denzel was a 3-star. So, when you look at it, not every 3-star.
Albright's a 4 on the composite as well.
Well, again, and I think a lot of these guys, depending on for fans, to go back to a little bit, each ranking, whether it's the composite, it's kind of a conglomerate of all of them. And, obviously each network has their own individual rankings. It doesn't necessarily matter what the ranking is. Again, we've been beating this dead horse. If the coaching staff evaluates you and believes in their evaluation, you're good enough. And I think that's what fans should really lean into more than anything.
No, I completely agree with you there. And it's something where, as we kind of look around this class, and it's something that I feel we hear a lot with some of these guys that Washington has taken in the past, where Tom Malu is a great example of somebody who is a little bit under the radar. In his case, it's because he's just so new to the game of football, where it's, we look at the potential and the high upside and everything. And yeah, that's the reason. That's a big part of recruiting evaluations is a long-term projection and that high-end evaluation of we believe in a couple of years in our system, this is what this guy could turn into. And that's why they get these offers. Like that is such a massive part of recruiting and evaluations. It's not just all, hey, we believe this kid can come in and compete from day one. And that's what, sometimes leads to guys getting a little bit more overlooked. So I'm glad you mentioned that because another guy who I think he's properly rated right now, where he's on that borderline 4-star from, I believe, the 247 Sports Composite as well, is Puyallup offensive lineman Gecova Doyal. This is another guy in that same light where you mentioned we saw Zach Albright quite frequently on the sidelines during spring practice. He's another guy who I look at and I just think he's one who I think Washington is very high on. I think vice versa as well. And he's somebody who, if you can get him in the boat early, that's an awesome way to start building this 2027 class with a big projectable offensive lineman who can probably play guard, can kick out to tackle if need be. Just having somebody like that who's also going to be playing across from Adiong Yang this upcoming year, the 3-star offensive lineman from the 2026 class. I think that he's somebody who Washington is going to make a high priority.
I think they've already made him a high priority. And again, I feel like I'm going to be just repeating myself over and over again here because these are the types of guys where there's no reason why you can't close on them early. There's no reason why when you get into, let's say by next spring, okay, let's just say hypothetically after the signing class, when you start getting those new commits in for that class, that's when it should be. Where wasn't Answer already committed by now for the 20?
Yeah, he committed in April of last year.
So you don't have anybody in the 27 class yet as of this reporting on July 17th, which is okay. But I think it's worth noting that means by the signing class this fall, you should have a few of these guys committed. And I think Doyle is another perfect example of that. And one position more so that we beat than anything else aside from the other, the other trench side is offensive line. And so anytime you have a high caliber offensive lineman from the state of Washington, it's obviously not Cody Green, but anytime, you still pick up, the Jared Hilbers of the world, even though he was from Oregon, anytime you can get those types of guys locally just to stay home, that makes everything so much easier because when you go pick one or two other guys from outside the region, you're able to be a little more selective because you're so confident in your evaluations of the in-state guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So one more in-state guy we want to get to before we talk about the number one player in the state of Washington is 4-star linebacker Liufau Loumoli from Eastside Catholic High School, where this is a guy I'm really intrigued by. I want to compare him to Zadris Reynisale just in terms of the interest he's receiving early, because I think he has the most offers of anybody in the state right now. I think he's a very different kind of player than Zadris is, but he's someone who I'm really intrigued to see because we look at Washington's linebacker class right now, and it's very light. There's just 3-star Isaiah Tokyo committed, and I think that's okay when you look at the way the position is set up long-term, especially after adding 3 high-end guys in last year's class. So I think that it's one of those things where you're able to kind of keep that class light, like at tight end. And then if you're able to close on Liufau Loumoli in the 27 class, that would be a really nice win for Brian Odom and this coaching staff. But those are all things to keep an eye on that I'm sure in all our everydayers' minds are secondary to 4-star defensive tackle Tevita Nonu. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One thing that I noticed when I started using Monarch was just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now, not only am I cutting back my budget, I feel healthier because I'm making more meals at home, saving a lot more money doing that, and I am absolutely loving it. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. So Lars, obviously, there's been a lot of scrutiny over this for this coaching staff over the 2026 defensive line class, which rightfully so. We'll talk about 4-star defensive tackle Tiayu Mukais a little bit more next week. We want to make sure we give him his own point in time. But we want to talk about this because 4-star defensive tackle Tevita Nonu from O'Day High School right here in Seattle is, would you say, the number one priority just in terms of the 2027 big board right now?
Without a doubt, because when you look at, again, from kind of carrying over from the last segment, doesn't have a ton of offers like we talked about earlier on the show. Those are probably coming in the next 2 to 3 months, so we won't be surprised when that happens. But Jason Cavusi and the staff did get in on him early, and when you talk about the O'Day guys that some people say you missed on, some people say you passed on, whatever the case is, optically, it doesn't help when you offer a bunch, the in-state guys that are literally right down the street at O'Day High School, and they don't end up at Washington. When you go back to the Miles Gaskins of the world, Owen Prentice, you go down the list, O'Day's years have been pretty good. And you brought in Taylor Mays to also help that O'Day pipeline. And now this is kind of more, I would say, if you're going to pick one of the three to take, you're taking the interior guy because those are so much harder to find. In my opinion, I think you're as well. When you look at how many, you can probably find edges a little more easier, I think. It's not a guarantee, but those interior guys, those true, defensive tackles, those are hard to come by. And if they're right down the road, like, Tiayu Mukais is in Colorado. If you don't get him, you kind of lucked into that offer anyways. This is one where no matter what, you have to find a way to get him in the class.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And it's very similar to how you and I feel about Derek Coleman-Brusa, where I would say, you talk about the value of edge versus defensive tackle. I think that in this, like in the case of Derek Coleman-Brusa being just as big as he is, he has the ability to play on the interior as well. But you're absolutely right. And especially if you and I just kind of look over the last couple of classes, this is a conversation I've had with several staffers, not just at Washington, but in other programs around the Big Ten, or just around just Power 4 conference football, really. It's the last few years have been extremely lacking just at defensive tackle on the West Coast, like really just west of Texas, which is one of the reasons you and I have emphasized Tiayu Mukais so heavily. But also when you go even further out towards Hawaii, where when Hawaii is going good, we don't have to dive into it too much, but a bunch of classes ago with guys like Sama Palma, Fatu Tuitele, all these other big name interior defensive linemen that were coming out of Hawaii, we haven't seen a lot of those kinds of players emerge in recent years. So that's something that I think has certainly hurt the optics of West Coast recruiting, in my opinion. But then I kind of look at where the rest of this class is. Again, when you talk about projectability, which is such an important thing in recruiting, there have been so many interior linemen that you look at that are right now weighing somewhere between 240, 250, 260, somewhere in that ballpark. I think of Simone Katawanga in the 26 class who's committed to USC, who is the number one ranked interior defensive lineman. He's listed at 6'5", 240. I'm not trying to bash on the kid. He's very, very talented, but there's still so much projection that goes into a ranking like that. And you look at somebody like Tevita Nonu, who's listed at 6'4", 270 pounds right now. That just makes it even more important where, there's still a certain amount of projection that goes into a player like that. But knowing that he's already succeeding at a high level at that weight and that size, and he's carrying his weight that well, is very important when you think about projecting out and recruiting, these rankings and all this other stuff, these things that go into just everything involved in recruiting. I think that that's one of the things that makes him so important, is how he's carrying his size right now as a rising high school junior.
Yeah, he's kind of ahead of the curve, so to speak, in that
Absolutely.
In that realm. And those, again, another reason why those are the guys you want to close in on early, where you don't have as much building up to. You don't have the, when we get him on campus in 2.5 years, then when he's really, really up to college weight, he's there. Nonu probably need maybe a year, maybe, like, in terms of just to truly get
somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
Just to really get up to full college speed and up to full college weight. But you look at that, like, that's the perfect size for a guy where we'll take him now and add maybe 10, 15 more pounds, get him up to 280, 285, whatever it ends up being. Because there's some of those guys where, hey, if you're a little on the smaller side weight-wise, but you still have the strength, you don't want to add too much weight on them to then, slow them down and things like that. But, it kind of is reminiscent of, I'm trying to think of who are some other in-state guys you can really compare him to, because and that's kind of the struggle.
I don't think there are many in recent years.
And I think that's why he's so important. This isn't just for every receiver that comes out, for every cornerback that comes out, there's always, quarterbacks. There's a bunch of positions that come out of the state of Washington. But again, like you hit on, defensive tackle, true interior defensive tackles are hard to come by. And so when you basically have a ready-made guy, that's why they're so important. And even look at across the rest of the board through the defensive line class in 2027 in general that they've offered. The kid out of North Dakota that I wrote about on Huskies.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Luke Starcevic?
Luke Starcevic.
Starcevic, yeah.
So,
that was good.
It's great. I was just making sure I had all my notes on him correct, because he was the guy that I wanted to talk about, where I'm talking about projectability and like just the high end upside of some of these guys. He's one of them where he's listed at 6'5", 250 pounds. And he's somebody who was on campus in the spring. He took an unofficial visit to Washington. And I'm so curious about where he might fall on Washington's board right now, because when we look back at the 2025 class, who was one of the guys that you were most shocked about joining that class?
Oh man, 20. Well,
I threw you the layup. It's Jack Schaefer. So Jack Schaefer was who, because another high-ranked player from North Dakota, where it's, he's coming to Washington after flipping from Iowa State. And obviously, like, I can't say enough good things about Jack Schaefer as a prospect. I'm very impressed with what he brings to the table. And when I look at a guy like Luke Starcevic, I think he is somebody who, again, at 6'5", 250, is a very projectable body along the interior and has everything you're looking for: the long arms, the explosiveness, the ability to carry more weight on his frame. And if you can add a guy like that alongside Tevita Nonu, that's going to put you in a really good spot. And obviously we want to see those sort of things come to fruition, because that's how you can build a true championship level contender in the Big Ten. And I'm sure that people are going to have some questions about that with the way the last couple of years have gone in terms of recruiting on the interior of the defensive line. But this is also why we wanted to talk about this, because they've done a really good job getting in early on some of these prospects and getting them on campus. Now the question is, can you close on these guys?
Which has kind of been the Achilles heel this entire time, if you think about it. Like, it hasn't been their issue getting in early on guys. It's truly been closing. But I think the more you get in early and the earlier you get in on some of these guys, and one thing also worth noting, again, another guy that doesn't have a massive offer list. And so when you're able to carve out that niche early on and say, hey, like, we're running I think they were offering number 6 for him, if I'm not 6 or 7.
Something like that, yeah.
And so, yes, it was back, in April, whatever. But getting in early on guys that end up popping later on, I'm not saying it's a guarantee that you get in, but it does help your case later on when we're talking about Final 3, Final 5. Why is Washington in there? Well, because they've been there from day one. And I think, aside from, Iowa State, North Dakota, and the obvious North Dakota State, UND, those sorts of schools, that was, that group is going to be one where Washington's going to come out of it. And then you just have to say, how can you close? That's why you look at the veterans that you brought in and transfer and say, hey, look, this is what we do with the veterans when you get to year 3 and 4 of the program. Just imagine if you spent all 4 years in the program, and then, Ryan Walter's defense, all those sorts of things coming together. This is why the 2027 class is so imperative, especially along the defensive line.
Absolutely, because a couple of things I want to get off my chest here before we keep going is we've talked about the turnover you're going to see on the defensive line in the next 2 years. you really want to make sure it's stocked up by the time you get to 2027, because that's when you'll be losing. I think the number is like 13 scholarship guys between the end of 2025 and 2026. So you want to make sure you're at full go by 2027, where obviously you'd like it to be a lot sooner than that. But a couple other names I think David Ayer should keep in mind. And a lot of these names were guys that we dropped a few weeks ago on our way too early 2027 big board over on our insider program. The link to that is down in the description below, by the way. Our 4-star Elija Harmon and 3-star Matamataga Uyunglele, where obviously with Uyunglele, it seems like Washington and UCLA are some of the early favorites, and his relationship with Jason Kafusi could end up being really important there. But I want to talk about Elija Harmon for a couple of seconds, because this coming year, in 2027, there are so many more high-end, true interior guys in that Tevita Nonu mold of you're already carrying 270, 280 pounds. And it's not going to be easy to recruit these guys, but you have an opportunity to do that. And this is going to be a really, really great test where obviously in 2026, it hasn't gone the way that I know fans would have hoped it would have. But in 2027, you have a really, really great opportunity to close on several high-end interior defensive line bodies that aren't straying too far out of your normal footprint. You can argue that Luke Starcevic is a little farther out than normal, but that's why I referenced Jack Schaefer. Maybe it's not so far away anymore. But with all these guys from Southern California that you have an opportunity to go and make an impact on early before, all the SEC powers, what have you, might start coming in and offering as they continue to move west. You have an opportunity to lock those guys up and say, hey, here's an opportunity to play close to home early in your career and in a power conference. So we'll see how those things work out. But Lars, we want to talk about some 2025 because we're going to play our favorite game, one award, who gets it? So for any everydayers, it might be a little bit newer to the channel. One award, who gets it? Yeah, it's pretty simple. For the end of the 2025 season, if Washington is going to bring home one trophy, what would that trophy be? Lars, I'll defer to you first.
So ironically, there's going to be a couple that came to mind, but the one that I'll go with Lou's first job is Jonah Coleman, Doak Walker. And the reason why I say that is because the effort and the work that Jonah, obviously fans can see it on social media, that he's put in with his body. Jonah came back for a reason, obviously to win, obviously to prepare himself for the NFL, but all of those things also, kind of build towards being one of the best running backs in the country. And you look in the Big Ten, yeah, there's going to be some stiff competition, obviously, and you can throw a couple SEC running backs in there. But Jonah should be one of the top 5, top 10 running backs in the country. And I think as long as the offensive line is able to hold out, as long as he's able to get enough carries, I think that's one thing that you kind of have hinted at over the months is maybe Jonah doesn't get as many carries maybe as we might think.
So I wanted to ask you that because between rushes and catches, he had 216 touches last year. Do you think he goes over or under that number? Because I do think it's going to be not significantly under, but if it's like 170 to 180 by the end of the year, I'm not going to be shocked.
I won't be shocked. So I'll take the under to answer your question. But I think the reason why I still would pick Jonah to win the Doak Walker is because Jonah can do more or less than any back that we had at Washington in a while. Where if you look at the Myles Gaskin era, Bishop Sankey, all those guys really had to be leaned on. Where they're talking 22, 25 carries. Like, hey, this is the bell cow. Whereas Jonah can take 12 to 15, maybe 16, 17. And still have the same level of yards per carry, total yards and touchdowns. That's the key here for me, where he doesn't have to have the touches and take the bruising, where he can still get exactly what you need. And I think that's, again, another reason why he would be a Doak Walker finalist at the very least.
Sure.
He can do so much more with less that maybe doesn't win it, but he'll certainly get the invite.
So I want to clarify one thing, because I hear what you're saying when you talk about 12, 15, 16, 17 carries a game. You're not saying that he can't take 25, 30 carries a game if need be. You're not saying that at all. But he's most effective, and that's what I think especially his sophomore season at Arizona proved. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I think we're going to see that decrease in carries for him, because I think he's going to go over 1,000 yards this year with the level of workload that Jedd Fisch is still going to want to give to him. But if you decrease his carries a little bit and you do keep him a little fresher, like you said, it's easier for him to get back to averaging whatever it was his sophomore year, 5.6, 5.7 yards per touch, or per carry, or it's like 7 yards per touch when factoring in receptions. That's your point, and I completely agree with you there. And that's something that I think could end up really helping his case at the end of the day. As soon as we were, talking about this and decided we wanted to do this today, honestly, my answer came like that. And it's the Art Broyles Trophy for Ryan Walters. I think that this is like honestly, the easiest one that for me as in the couple of years we've done this show, because I just look at what Ryan Walters did in the 2022 season at Illinois. And by no means am I saying he's going to replicate that this season, because it's unfair to ask anyone to go out there and replicate the number one overall defense in college football. With that being said, if he improved on a pass defense that finished top 10 in the nation last season, while also, let's say he cuts 25 yards per game off of that rushing yards allowed from last season, which was 161.8 and good for 15th in the Big Ten. All of a sudden, you're looking at a defense that is taking a big step forward. And if you're doing that, you're still increasing mightily the amount of turnovers that you're generating. I feel like that's something we're going to see this year. I feel like we're going to see Washington take a big step forward in terms of sacks allowed, and a defense that at the end of the day was still probably considered slightly above average, in my opinion, because of how good they were against the pass last season. If you can take that to a top 5 defense in the Big Ten, will that be enough to win the award at the end of the day? Probably not. But if it happens and we do see these major improvements and, these lists start to come out and it's, Ryan Walters is a quarterfinalist, he's a semifinalist. Oh, hey, he's in the top 5. That's not something that's going to shock me because of, you referenced this earlier this week, all the experience that he already has in conference play.
I like that one. And ironically, I think the other one that I would have gone with would have been Takario Davis or Jim Thorpe for exactly what you said, where it's the Ryan Walters effect. It's getting the guys that, he, can maximize the talent of. When you have John Richardson as the guy who obviously coached both him and Peaches at Arizona. But Ryan Walters is the guy where maybe, again, didn't have great success as a head coach at Purdue. But some guys just aren't a head coach. And I don't think that's necessarily a knock on Ryan Walters. I mean, Pete Kwiatkowski is a great defense coordinator. He had a head coach. Like, I think there's certain guys where they're just better assistants and better coordinators than they are head coaches. And I think that if Ryan Walters wins the Broyles Award, again, that'll help kind of his, overall look and acumen kind of go away from what happened at Purdue, where, again, if you take away Purdue, Ryan Walters is probably one of the best coaches in the country just in terms of assistants and things like that. And I think that's exactly what the Broyles Award would show is a guy that, hey, Steve Belichick did good, but Ryan Walters is great. And I think that's exactly what Jedd needs, especially in the Big Ten when you already have familiarity with what Big Ten offense you want to do. You're not going to have those Wazoo games of, hey, John Material just ran for 2 touchdowns on, unnecessary reasons. Where you're looking at that saying Ryan Walters can maximize the talent unlike any other on the defensive side of the ball. That alone is why he should win the Broyles Award. And again, if he's able to cut, all those things down, if they're, middle of the road even in terms of the Big Ten, because 15 is probably there's only like 2-3 schools below Washington at that point.
Sure.
In the Big Ten. If you're able to get into, say, the top 10.
3, yeah. 18 schools in the Big Ten now. That's right.
That's why the number always throws me off. I'm like, how many are there? 18, 20, 25? Anything. But the point
it'll be more before we know it.
But besides that, it's not like they have to. We're saying, Ryan Walters is going to, make them the top 3 run defense in the Big Ten. No, it doesn't have to be like that, especially in year 1, because that would be asking a little too much. But that type of improvement, those types of improvements are what we expect from Ryan Walters because of his track record, and I think that would be a just reward for his cause.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest reasons I wanted to make sure that we highlighted him, because you talk about maximizing the talent. And that's such an important thing here when, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this blitz heavy scheme that he's going to try to utilize with 5 down linemen. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I'm pretty sure he had, if not the second, the highest blitz rate of any Big Ten team last season. And I think that's something to keep in mind here, because at the end of the day, if those numbers do end up translating into more sacks and we do end up seeing Washington take a big step forward with the defensive line in that department, that's something that's going to really resonate with not just voters at the end of the day when it comes to, to some of these awards, but it's something that's going to resonate with just the Big Ten in general and saying, okay, yeah, maybe Ryan Walters wasn't necessarily great as a head coach, but one of the things I do, and one of the reasons I went with Ryan Walters as well, was you go back and you look at, especially last season at Purdue, the defense was not bad when you just isolate the defense and watch what was going on. But the offense could not move the ball. And there were so many different points of time where the defense just got worn down. And by the end of the game, it's just, no, that's just a tired bunch of guys. There's no way they're going to be able to stop anybody in this conference. So I look at what he's already done for players on that side of the ball and how he's developed guys across his time at Missouri, Illinois, and then Purdue. And I think that I really can't help but think that he's going to take a big step forward, or help Washington's defense take a big step forward, that is this season, and improve on some of the weaknesses that we saw last year, which really were more personnel based when you talk about the depth that we saw at those positions, while also maximizing the talent that you have on the back end of the defense, especially, you look at outside corners in Ephesians Prysock and Takario Davis.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's also not like, you got better bodies than you did last season, but it's not like Ryan Walters is now inheriting a bunch of 5-stars. So I think it's going to be a true testament of his coaching and development, because Ontario Thompson's a great player, but he's not a 5-star. If you think about it, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's not being given, Georgia's roster. Let's say that word. That's no slight, but it's just like, that's why he's such a good coach, is he can make it look like a similar caliber of defense, even though the star ranking and everything doesn't necessarily add up.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of where I wanted to wrap this up too, was you talk about maximizing talents. That's where we're going to see that the most. It's with getting guys like Simone Peppa, getting guys like Ontario Thompson, Taitai Uyunglele. I didn't necessarily throw him into that same mold because he already has some of that proven production from his time at Arizona, where Peppa, it's been a couple of years since he was an all Pac-12 first teamer and he's dealt with some injuries. But if you're able to maximize that and help that unit in particular take a step forward, while really just keeping everything else status quo, when you talk about what it looked like last season, you're in a much better place than you were. And that's helping you win a couple extra games, because Indiana can't completely kill the clock. Iowa's a different story, but maybe, you plug a couple of holes and tackle a little bit better against Caleb Johnson, and Rutgers being its own story as well. But yeah, and you referenced the Wazoo game too. But all of a sudden, a few of those games where you can't stop the run and it doesn't matter. Like I remember in the second half of the USC game, it felt like that game was going to go in a different direction, and Lincoln Riley just decided to stop running the ball for whatever reason. But if you're able to make some kind of improvement on that, you are in such a much better spot. And he's going to get a lot of the credit for it, being a former head coach, having the acumen that he does. So that's something I'm very intrigued to watch this upcoming season. But Lars, that's all we got to today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all the viewers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you know when we post a new video. If you need questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.